is the greatest Final Fantasy director of them all. What's good, my fellow peasants? How you all doing? So this is going to be an objective breakdown of all the directors in the mainline Final Fantasy games based on what scores did their games produce. So this isn't going to be some subjective ramble or my opinion on who I think is best and why, because of course we all have the directors we love and we all have the directors who we'd like to tie a weighty object to and push them into a murky canal. And I just want to say before we start, the data taken here, it's from reviews across the board for the PS3s, the PS4s, the PS2s, from Metacritic, from IGN, from Steam. There's even some infographic data in here which was gathered from the Japan market. So there's a really broad range of data that should actually lead to a pretty accurate result. And I've got to say, before I started this video, I made a prediction, and bar one, I was able to predict exactly where each director would come. But let's get into it, and if you've really got some balls, go to the comment section now. Make a prediction on what do you think the order will be. That way you can come back and do a little victory dance of called it once you get it right. So let's get into the numbers. Whee! So starting off in no particular order, the Gooch himself, Mr. Hironobu Hironobu Sakaguchi. I'm so bad with Japanese. It's going to get worse from here on out, I can promise you. And unless you've been living under a rock, you know he directed FF1 through to 5. Hence his renowned title of the father of Final Fantasy. And as you can see, the scores are all coming in around about 4 out of 5. So this is all out of 5. And I've got to say, I'm kind of surprised. I thought they'd do worse than that. Bearing in mind how much of a hindrance technology was back then, how low their funding and resources were. Sometimes they even had a team of only just 5 people. So these are actually pretty good scores. And adding these up and coming up with the average, so simply adding those scores and dividing by 5, the Gooch comes in at a director's score of 3.93 out of 5. Next we have Kitase, and my personal favourite director, and you'll probably see at the end of this video why he's always been my favourite, but he did 6, well he co-directed that with Ito, he'll be appearing later, 7, 8 and 10, and as anyone who knows a damn about Final Fantasy, this was, and is still probably the most successful era of Final Fantasy, where the most beloved games came out, and Kitase was the forerunner of it. He was the leader of the golden era of the early 90s to 2000 Final Fantasies, so it's no surprise that he comes in with a very astonishingly high score of 4.41 out of 5. God damn! Coming in with just as spectacular and prestigious a Final Fantasy record, we have Hiroyuki Ito. Probably screwed that up. I don't care anymore, guys. I don't care. Leave me alone. So he's got 6 on his record. Like I said, he co-directed that with Sakaguchi, which 6 being the highest rated Final Fantasy to date. When we combine that also with the 9, one of the other best rated Final Fantasies, and 12, which didn't actually do bad, 4.06 out of 5. Now I can tell you that FF12 didn't have that score back in the day. It's actually taken quite a few years for it to get bumped up. Again, 12 is that game where it was not as well received at the time, but as time's gone on, people have kind of found a love for it and it's really come up in popularity. And I've always found it interesting how this happens to Final Fantasy games. Like for example, 13 was completely the opposite. It scored pretty well at the start, really good scores in fact, and then as time went on, the scores actually began to decline. So I don't know what causes this. I don't know what attributes to scores influxing or is defluxing a word? Defluxing. It sounds like some sort of nasty beauty regime. Well, it's a word now. So Ito is coming in with a score of 4.36 out of 5. Now I kind of feel really bad about Nobuaki Komoto, fuck off guys. He directed FF11 and the original 14. The original. Yep, the one that flopped, the one that bombed. Now Final Fantasy 11 didn't do too bad, getting a score of 3.73 out of 5. I know some people really love that game. Clocked in insane number of hours, so I kind of thought it'd do better than 3.73, but Final Fantasy 14 got a 2.8 out of 5. Oh. So that puts Komoto's director score at a pretty low 3.27 out of 5. And following on with the MMO theme, the 5th director I want to score is Yoshida. Now, I kind of thought of how to score him, but I'm going to do it by expansions, because kind of with FF14, each expansion has a score, and it's kind of like almost a new game. So I figured I'd do it this way. Now, A Realm Reborn got a pretty low 3.53 out of 5. which again was surprising to me. A big improvement on the 2.8. But then Heaven's Ward significantly improved the score to a 3.98, and then spread me on a cracker thin. Stormblood is absolutely stormblooding the ratings with a 9 out of 10 unanimously across most sites, aka a 4.5 out of 5, which gives Mr. Yoshida's score a clean, well-rounded 4 out of 5. Just straight 4 out of 5. Now again, this is just for his contributions as a director in Final Fantasy. With most all of these directors, they have done other stuff with other franchises. Now, for example, Yoshida, he was the director on Dragon Quest games. I feel I need to make that specific because we're going to move on to a very controversial one next, which is Nomura. Oh, Nomura. Trying to come up with a score for this guy was so hard because Nomura is just, I mean, how do you even begin? He's been a director on the Kingdom Hearts games, so he's definitely got that under his belt. But in terms of Final Fantasy, the crazy mind-blowing fact is, guys, he's never been a director on any game. I mean, literally not one. The only thing he was a director of in terms of Final Fantasy was Advent Children. Of course, that's a movie. So Versus would have been his first actual I'm the director. Which is kind of a mind-boggling detail considering there's always arguments on the internet. You know, with some people saying, oh, Nomura's the best director, he's better than all of them. With the irony being he's never actually been a director. But I'm not so much of a douchebag to really run with that line of thinking because I do know that he's more or less played director's roles. And what I mean by that is he's contributed so much to specific titles and been so heavily involved and influential that he's kind of been director in everything but name. So, rather than doing certain administrative tasks which would technically make him a director, he's done everything else. So with these titles I'm going to list him down as, he's done character design, battle visual director, monster design, and he was one of the predominant story writers. FF6, 7, 8 and Crisis Core, those are the ones he were far more invested in and involved in than everything else. Most everything else in the franchise he's listed as a character designer and concept artist, but even just with these titles here, it gives him a healthy score, 4.36 out of 5. Nothing to be sniffed at. Moving straight on to Toriyama, Motmu. And he did the Final Fantasy trilogy, so FF13, 13-2, Lightning Returns. He also did 10-2 and 12 Revenant Wings. Whoa. So he's kind of like the master of spin-offs. So if you hate prequels and sequels, then cast your scowl of disapproval upon Toriyama. I mean, he's not going to have a great score. All of his games are pretty much Marmite. He's the king of Marmite. Toriyama, the Marmonite King, and you know, for me, I personally, two of my favourites are 13-2 and 10-2, so as much as I do love Toriyama, I love his games, he's also one of my favourite directors. He only gets a director's score, bottom of the barrel almost, at 3.56 out of 5. Ooh, that hurts me, but I can understand why. YRP in position. Only 2 directors left to go. Now this one I wasn't sure whether or not to add in, but Takashi Tokita. I was kind of going along the idea of mainline spin-offs and mainline games only. And he has had an involvement, so I'm just going to include him. He did the 4 remake, 4 after years, then things like Legends 2 Dimensions, The Heroes of Light. But he's also dabbled in helping out on the original and in Final Fantasy franchise. He's done a lot, so I definitely feel he deserves recognition as being one of Final Fantasy's main directors. But his scores are all kind of 4s, mid 3s, which puts him at an average of 3.7 out of 5. And the final director is none other than the Tabster. Hajime Tabata. Yeah. So of course we all know he did 15, probably the most spoken about director these days on how you feel about him, but he also did Crisis Core and Type 0, and just lumping those scores in, so 15 actually does get a score of 4.07 out of 5, which is insane. It's nowhere near as high as say 7, 8 and 9, but considering how much controversy and certain amounts of dissatisfaction like you hear around the internet on 15, to actually go through the reviews and see it come out with a 4.07 average, or an 8 out of 10 more or less, it's actually a pretty good score despite the vocal minority certainly wanting to give the impression otherwise. Yeah, it's not bad. So combining that up with Crisis Core, Type 0, which certainly does drag it down. Type 0 wasn't that well received in the West, mostly for visuals, based on the views. You know, a PSP game that was ported to the PS4. It was never gonna score that well, let's be real, let's face it. If I was to take just the score though, from what it got for the PSP in Japan, it was one of the best rated games on the PSP. So, but I'm gonna include the PS4, which certainly dragged its score down. So that gives Tabata a not half bad 3.94 out of 5. Actually not a bad score at all. So there it is, guys. Those are the 9 main directors, or as close to mainline directors, who have been involved in the 15 mainline games and their spin-offs. Which, damn, that's quite a lot of directors for just one franchise. But bringing that list across into order now, we have at number 1 Kitase. 2 and 3, we have a joint 2nd and 3rd. Ito and Nomura scored the exact same. Then 4th, Yoshida. 5th, Sakaguchi. 6th, Tabata. 7th, Tokita. 8th, Toriyama. And 9, Komoto. There it is, guys. That is the listing of the directors from objectively best to worst. And like I said, this list I actually predicted. The only thing I got wrong is I thought Toriyama would actually get above Tokita, but unfortunately Lightning Returns just really dragged his score down. I think, yep, Lightning Returns only scored a 3.15 out of 5. Holy shit, that game did not score well. Ito and Nomura, I kind of predicted that they would be 2nd and 3rd, but number 1 Kitase. It feels good. He is my favourite director, and when I've been asked in the past why Kitase, it's kind of strange because I see these directors all as having very different attributes, different strengths, different weaknesses. For example, I kind of said how Tabata, he's the kind of guy who gets shit done. Like, give this man a deadline, he'll meet it. He knows what has to be done, he knows how to market stuff, he knows business. Whereas Nomura, he's never got that, he's never enjoyed that, and he's always been the creative producer. So I call him a creative director. But Kitase, I've always seen him as kind of the middle ground between those two. He's been creatively involved in some of my favourite Final Fantasies, but he's also been the kind of guy who gets shit done. Like, he's worked so closely with Nomura, who has these crazy ambitions and visions. You know, look at 7 and 8. How crazy and far out there they were, and at the time that these games were made, how ambitious, you know, those visions were, and yet Kitase makes it happen. That's the thing, I feel like he can also give creative ideas, but he can also take the creative ideas of others and structure them, make it happen, see it realised. And that's the beauty of Kitase, is I kind of see him as like an all-rounder, as a middleman. But there it is, guys, you get the idea, and this just makes me so excited. And that's why I'm kind of still really hopeful for 7 Remake, because it has Kitase at the helm. And this video, his portfolio, his history, it shows that he can deliver, especially when working with Nomura, because these have had a long history. But that's what's interesting about 7 Remake. Nomura, for the first time, like I said, he's never directed a Final Fantasy, but he's actually listed as the director for 7 Remake, whereas Kitase, he's listed as a producer. So the 7 Remake, it's really interesting because they're both coming back 20 years later, but they're going to be in different roles this time, and instead of Kitase being the director, it's going to be Nomura, and we now know that there is another development leader from Business Division 4 who's never been involved with the original, so it'll be really interesting to see just how all that really plays out. But we definitely have 2 of the franchise's star directors on board. That gives me confidence. But rounding this video out, and just some honourable mentions to some of the other directors we have in this franchise. Plus, I'm certain you'll get a semblance of satisfaction in watching me fuck up 8 Japanese names in a row. So we have Ishii, Kawazu, Tanaka, Ide, Matsuno, Murasawa, Kamiyama, and Nakazato, and they've been involved in things like Dirge of Cerberus, the Tactics games, the Chronicles games, the Dimensions games, the Legends games. Matsuno, for example, he was the original director of Final Fantasy XII. Then you've got the Mana series, just a whole broad range of things. But one thing's for certain, there's a lot of old names on there. I know that sounds bad to say, but most of them have been with the franchise 20 years. Personally, I think we're in need of some new fresh blood, some new fresh eyes, creativity, and insight. Is that terrible to say? All I'm going to say is in before Yoko Taro. I know someone down there in that comment section is saying Yoko Taro should direct FF games. Secretly, I kinda don't, but do agree with you. Kinda. Until the next video, guys. Goodbye!